Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers and sisters, and welcome to another episode of Way to Behave, where we go through and we choose certain ayat, verses from the Quran, and focus on how we can improve our behavior, inshaAllah ta'ala. With us today, inshaAllah ta'ala, are three beautiful guests. We have with us Brother Idris. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Idris.
Wa alaikum assalam.
And also we have Muhammad and Abdullah. Assalamu alaikum, brothers. How are you both?
Thanks so much.
Barakallahu feek. Thanks for being with us today, inshallah ta'ala. I'm hoping today's show will be very fruitful. And as we have done before, in previous episodes, we are speaking about the advice of Luqman the wise, and that what he gave to his son. These verses are found in Surah Luqman itself. There's a chapter in the Quran called Surah Luqman, which is the 31st chapter of the Quran. And there are 10 advices that Luqman, that he gives his son. So we're coming towards the end of those advices. Previously we spoke about how Luqman, how he advised his son what he should do. Okay, he should have belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He should not associate any partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He also warned him of not falling into arrogance. And arrogance is one of the most dangerous diseases that can occupy one's heart. But in Islam, it's very important for us to understand that when Allah Jalla wa Ala tells us and asks us to do something, there's always an alternative. There's a solution. Don't do this, but rather do this. And similarly, in the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we find that the Prophet alayhi wasallam would say, don't do this, but do that. And this is a very important aspect of at-tarbiyah, of nurturing and teaching. It's not always about prohibiting, don't do this, don't do that. It's very easy for us to fall into, when teaching our children, don't do that. Take your hands off that. Keep quiet. Don't do this, don't do that. There was an example that was given to me. I read actually. It said that when you're a child, you're told, don't talk, listen. Don't talk, listen, don't talk, listen, when you're young. And when you're older, you're told, speak up for yourself. You're not talking anymore. Say something. It's the opposite. So when you're a child, you're told, keep quiet. And when you're older, I can't hear what you're saying. And you're not talking enough. What's going on? So it's almost a confusion as to at what stage do I keep quiet and at what stage do I start talking. So part of our tarbiyah, part of nurturing is to educate, to teach, to give other options. As we teach our children the haram, those things that we should stay away from, we should also teach them the halal, what is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as Luqman the wise said to his son, do not walk upon the earth in a state of arrogance. And that was mentioned specifically, وَلَا تَمْشِ فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَحًا. Don't walk upon the earth in a haughty way. So then how should we walk upon the earth? How should we be? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَقْصِدْ فِي مَشْيِكَ. Then be mu'tadil. Be, if you like, moderate in the way that you walk. This is one of the first things that when you see somebody is how they walk. And it's not necessarily for us to start judging people, but how you walk can give a big indication of the state of that person. If their shoulders are down, they're walking with their head down, and they're scraping and dragging their feet along, you can see that there's a problem in that person. They're thinking about, they're overthinking, maybe they're feeling down or anxious. Another person is walking, she is walking with their head high, shoulders are raised like that, and walking, swinging their arms. Okay, and when they look away from people, maybe that's a sign of arrogance. So how should we be when walking amongst the people? How should we behave? And this is a practical example of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to be. Be moderate when walking amongst people. The walk of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not too fast, not too slow. As Ali radiallahu anhu described, that when the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam would walk, it was as though he would be walking downhill. Like, not the strides weren't too big, weren't too small, but he would cover distances in the middle. And this is how we should be. So, Brother Muhammad, do you have, how do you see, when you look at somebody's walking in a particular way, how do you see people? How does that appeal to you when you look at people walking in a particular way?
Well, I think it also has to do with the culture, how we view these things. So, for example, Luqman told his son about two signs of arrogance. And sometimes, and nowadays, we have other signs of arrogance. So it's not only limited to those signs, the two signs, the voice and the way we walk. It also other things. The last episode, Sheikh Wasim, you mentioned looking at phones while talking to people. It's a sign of arrogance as well. So it's not only due to the way of walking, it's also the behavior, the way of speaking. Some people speak with pride, and you feel like they don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's very good, mashallah. Abdullah, we don't just restrict arrogance in the way that we walk. I mean, it impacts in the way that we speak, in the way that we look at people, how we address people. So arrogance can be shown in many, many different ways. We were discussing a little bit earlier a comment you wanted to make about the topic of what was it we're on at the moment.
Voice raising. When he said in the ayah, وَغْضُبْ مِنْ صَوْتِكَ, I've maybe read something about it in the scholars' writings. One of them was saying, if إِنْ كَانَ رَفْعُ الصَّوْتِ خَيْرًا لَمَا جَعَلَهُ للحمير. If this voice raising was better, he won't make it as an example for the donkeys as an animal.
Yeah.
So raising voices in front of people just to show off, you know, it's not a good thing as a manner. In fact, as we people, we know that it's not right. It's always in front of your parents to make your voice lower for them, in front of your teacher, your people working with. It's just good to make your voice in the middle as wasat.
Sure. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran. وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. That we made you a nation which is in the middle. No extreme on one side or the other. In the way that you eat, the way that you walk, the way that you speak, in everything. Subhanallah. And what comes to my mind is during the Hajj of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he asked Fadl ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, to go and find him some small pebbles to throw at the jamarat. A very menial, very small job. When the companion came back and gave the small stones to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet took this as an example and said that إِنَّمَا كَانَ أَهْلَكَ مَنْ كَانَ قَبْلَكُمْ, that what destroyed nations who came before you is that they went to extremes. Telling us that when you choose small stones for the jamarat, choose small ones. It's not about finding the biggest rocks, the biggest stones. No, stick to the sunnah. But subhanAllah, I was just pondering over that and thinking that the Prophet ﷺ chose this occasion to warn us of going to extremes in just picking up small stones when going for the jamarat. Bearing in mind that, you know, when people go for the jamarat, they can get quite excited. They say, you know, they've been saving up their whole life, and yesterday was the day of Arafah, the person who's making Hajj, of course, and then it's the day of Eid, you know, and then they start running. They say, there's the shaitan, he's tried to harm me and misguide me my whole life. It's my day to get him back. So these small stones, what's this going to do against shaitan? Let me just get something a little bit bigger, you know. Or even, I've seen umbrellas and shoes, and, you know, I've seen ihram being thrown as well. You know, people kind of get really excited around these times. But it is important to adhere to that what the Prophet ﷺ advised us to be like. And Allah Azza wa Jal made us, or tells us to be the middle people, middle path. We do not worship the prophets, nor do we reject the prophets. We believe in them as the best of men who received revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whereas previous nations have gone misguided concerning that, worshipping the prophets. And some of them rejected, even wanting to kill, iyadhan billah, some of the prophets. In Islam, we have that middle path. So in all matters, we take a middle path. And the example that is given here, and it follows immediately after Luqman the wise telling his son, you know, don't walk upon this earth like this. There are some beautiful verses in Surah Al-Furqan, where Allah Azza wa Jal tells us about Ibadur Rahman, the slaves of the most merciful. How do they walk upon the earth? يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا, with humility, humbleness. وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. And if the ignorant people swear them, curse them, because arrogant people, when they're walking, you know, if they find themselves arrogant, they mock others. you know. They walk past, think that they are better than people. Maybe they wink to other people, look at this person and look at us, you know. But Allah Azza wa Jalla tells us that the slaves of the Rahman, the first one that is mentioned is that they walk upon the earth hawna, with humility. Not mutakabbira, not with arrogance and thinking that they are better. When we ponder over these verses, we can see that when we do ponder over it, it has a direct impact on our suluk, on our behavior. And a person who acts other than that, you can see that maybe they don't have a link with the Qur'an. How many lectures have you heard? Then the one who's giving the lecture, read the Qur'an, have a relationship with the Qur'an, and you're like, yeah, okay, but maybe you don't. Those people who have a strong link with the Qur'an, as Aisha radiallahu anha said, that the Prophet ﷺ was like a walking Qur'an.
Yes.
He was a walking Qur'an. كَانَ خُلُقُهُ الْقُرْآنِ. His manners, alayhi salatu wasalam, were exactly in everything that you find in the Qur'an. So when you start speaking about how to speak, how to walk, how to deal with one another, this was the manner of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the more knowledge we have of the Qur'an, you will find that you will be closer to that kind of person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to be. We've come to the end of this first segment, inshallah ta'ala. Brothers and sisters, mashallah, it's a very good discussion with the brothers here. And I think, inshallah ta'ala, you can agree that this is something that we certainly haven't finished. So please join us after the break, where we will be continuing with the advice of Luqman the Wise. Please join us after this short break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
يتدبرون القرآن.
One day the Prophet ﷺ came out to the companions radiallahu anhum, and he said to them, don't you bear witness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one worthy of worship and He has no partners? Don't you bear witness that I am the messenger of Allah? Don't you bear witness that the Qur'an is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So the companions radiallahu anhum, they said, yes, O Prophet of Allah. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, فَأَبْشِرُوا, have the glad tidings, the great news as a result of this. Because the Qur'an has two ends to it. One end with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and one end in your hands. Then he said to them alayhi salatu wassalam, فَتَمَسَّكُوا بِهِ, hold fast to it, because you would never be led astray and you would never be perished if you're holding fast to the Book of Allah. Because of that, join us every week in Qur'an in Depth, where we recite and reflect and ponder over the verses of the Qur'an. We go in depth into the verses, following the ways of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions radiallahu anhum. When they used to take the verses, one set of verses after another, they would recite it, they would reflect upon the meanings of it, and they would act according to it, and then they would go to the next set of verses. Join us every week in Qur'an in Depth, so that we would recite and reflect and learn more about the Book of Allah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our life and to make us among those who follow the Qur'an and the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, brothers and sisters, to The Way to Behave. We were previously discussing the advice of Luqman the Wise and how he would speak in a very beautiful and wise manner to his son. We spoke about the advice where he said to walk upon the earth in a moderate way. The advice continues where Luqman the Wise, he says, وَغْضُضْ مِنْ صَوْتِكَ, that he should lower his voice. Now the word that was mentioned specifically to his son, to lower his voice, is something that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala mentions in a number of places in the Qur'an. We know that in Surah Al-Ahzab, where Allah Ta'ala mentions to the believing men and to the believing women to lower their gaze. So the believing people are to lower their gaze and to lower their voice. Now, what does it mean to lower your voice? Does it mean so much so that people can't hear what you're saying? No. It means that you shouldn't be shouting and screaming. When you want to discuss a point with somebody, it doesn't mean because maybe you think that you're right, that you're going to shout everybody down. Okay? Not only I'm right, I'm the loudest, so you're going to hear me. Okay? When telling the truth, it doesn't mean you need to speak the loudest. The Prophet ﷺ was out with the companions, and it was on a pilgrimage, and some of them were really, their voices were really, really loud, screaming almost. The Prophet ﷺ said that you don't need to shout and scream because you have a Lord who hears you. You have a Lord who hears you. So it's not about, for example, when people are maybe performing the Hajj or Umrah. It is sunnah to slightly raise your voice when saying the talbiyah, labbaik Allahumma labbaik, but not to shout and scream it. But ordinarily, when you're speaking like this, that's fine. But just to raise it just a couple of notches, that you are answering the call of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So ordinarily, when you're speaking to somebody, to show manners, to show humbleness, is to speak moderately and not to shout and scream. And the advice or the example that Allah Ta'ala gives to us, that the most despised sound is the sign or the sound of a donkey. When you hear the donkey, it's like something, I don't like to hear that. When somebody's shouting and screaming like that, it's not nice to hear. So as Muslims, we need to speak, again, in a moderate way. Brother Idris, I think you want to share something with us, inshallah.
I'd like to mention how sometimes, like in this day and age where you find people who say, well, sometimes things are different. Perhaps, raising your voice was looked upon a certain way during a different time. But now this time, maybe it's not, we look at it as not that bad. But I often try to say the same way Umar ibn Khattab would say that, we judge people by how you act. Often, sometimes you may see something some way, but other people are affected and see things a different way.
Yeah.
So the advice that I always give people is that don't go by what you think. Go what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, because He's the one who's wise and knows what He's talking about.
Yeah.
Go by what He says. If He says don't do something, don't try to rationalize your way around it. Because in the end, Allah's wisdom is above your wisdom.
Yes.
And most people won't agree with what you're saying anyways. If you go around the world, most people won't agree that a loud person is sort of not looked at and thought of as a certain way.
Yeah.
And you don't want to get treated, you don't want harm to come to you also, because Umar Khattab said, people will treat you how you act. In this life, we treat you by what you say and what you do.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that we're correctly saying, okay, because you're loud, you have this in your heart.
Yeah.
Perhaps you don't. But if you're a loud person, people will treat you a certain way.
Yeah, that's true. If I can, I've taken the benefit that you mentioned, but also I can extract from what you've said, in that contextualizing the Quran and understanding the advice that Allah Azza wa Jal gave to us. A person can do away with many things of the Quran if they believe that, that was at that time and that age where, you don't need to raise your voice. We live in a different time and age now. Okay, where you should walk in a moderate way, you should walk in a humble way. That was for that time. Nowadays, you should put yourself forward. If you want to be first and you want to be the best, then you need to be like this. So if a person has this approach, you start doing away with the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You do away with how the Prophet ﷺ told us how we should behave. Yes. For example, the Prophet ﷺ, and this is kind of off the topic, but it's the same principle. That the Prophet ﷺ said in many sound ahadith that that a woman, for example, should not travel a distance or journey except without a mahram, the distance of a day and a night. Okay, there's multiple ahadith stating that. Now a person says, well, I can travel to the other side of the world in 14 or 16 hours. If I'm living in Europe, I can travel to Australia, for example, in about 22 hours. So therefore, this is the hadith says a day and a night. So therefore, a woman can travel anywhere without a mahram because she falls into the day and the night. So the question is now then, how do we understand these hadith? If this is the understanding to be understood in the modern era, then we have to do away with how many ahadith that are or were understood at a particular way and at a particular way at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So it's important for us to understand that the advice that was given to us is timeless. The advice that was given to us by the Prophet ﷺ and Allah Ta'ala is something as to be kept and preserved for all time. It is not people to change, as they say, change the direction where the goalposts are. We're going to make it wider, we're going to make it smaller. No. This is the advice that Allah Azza wa Jal gave to the Prophet ﷺ, to the companions, and that's also applicable to us. If we start living in an age where we want to start diluting and doing away with that, that's not applicable now. That's not applicable now. I mean, it's almost like we've got half of the Quran is no longer applicable to people, because people now have made themselves almost supersede the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Who are you to say what we are going to accept and what to reject? And this is a very, very dangerous understanding, saying that, right, we're living in the year 2019 through 2021, 2030, whatever era we're living in. We need a brand new interpretation of the Quran. What do you think you're going to reinterpret? This reinterpretation essentially is, we're going to do some cut-paste job of this is not applicable anymore. Well, because the state of the people. The Quran came to change the people, not for us to change what is in the Quran. Okay, there's a struggle going on here between people. People think that we are so advanced in our society and the technology and things like that. We've come to a knowledge now where maybe these kind of things aren't applicable anymore. So they've made themselves above the word of Allah Azza wa Jal. When in fact, subhanallah, the kalima of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, hiya al-ulya. The words of Allah Azza wa Jal are above us and always above us. So it's very important for us to deal with the Quran in a correct manner. Now, because this is the last advice that Luqman, that he gave to his son, that we find in the Quran. And I just want to go because there are 10 advices that were given, yes. Subhanallah. And these 10 advices for each parent and for us to implement, to give to our children, to remind ourselves, to remind our children, inshallah ta'ala. The first piece of advice that was given is the belief in one Lord, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not to associate any partners with Allah Azza wa Jal. This is fundamental, the most important right. The second most important right is the right of the parents, subhanallah, just as the Quran mentions to us. This was the second advice, to be good to one's parents. And then thirdly is to remember the quwwah, the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to understand al-qadr, and to understand it in the correct way. This was the third advice. The fourth advice is, because of course those three out of the first four are to do with Allah tabarak wa ta'ala, understanding Him, as well as worship, following your parents, obeying your parents. Yes. The fifth one, or the fourth one rather, was to establish the salah, that personal relationship you have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to command the good and to forbid the evil. So not only focusing on yourself, but to focus and help one another. The best of people, anfa'uhum linnas. The best of people are those who are of most benefit to other people. And then to be patient, to show sabr when you are commanding the good and forbidding the evil with others, to remain patient. Maybe people respond to you in a way you don't like it, but remain patient. This was the way of the Prophets alayhim salatu wasalam. And then don't have pride. Don't be arrogant. If somebody says to you or turns away from your advice, don't be arrogant and say, hey, you need to listen to me. You have to understand that maybe people will listen to you, maybe they won't listen to you. But don't see yourself as better than other people. You are a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and seeking Allah's reward alone. Then don't walk with insolence. Not only don't have pride, but don't walk upon the earth. This deals with two things. Things that are in the heart. Don't have kibr in your heart. And don't display kibr. Actually physically walk upon the earth as though you are better than other people. Then the next advice was to be moderate. To be in the middle path, not only the way that you walk, but in all of your affairs. Because this is the way that Allah Azza wa Jalla wants us to be. In all of our matters is to be in the middle. And finally is to lower your voice. Not to shout and scream, okay? But to speak to people in the very best way. The way that you address people, from the way that you give salam. If you meet a person, okay, and then you grab their hand in a harsh way and you shout really loudly, Assalamu alaikum, immediately that person feels their heart's closed. It's like, what happened? But you meet another person, Assalamu alaikum. Immediately, their heart is opened. And for this reason, that the Prophet ﷺ told us that if you want to instill mahabba, love amongst the people, afshu salama baynakum, spread salam amongst yourselves. When you meet people, those people that you know and those people that you don't know. A time would come that the Prophet ﷺ said that a time would come that people would only give salam to the people that they know. If you don't know that person, you don't know who they are. You're living in a Muslim country. You could be in Mecca or Medina, knowing that there are only Muslims there, but you walk past each other and you don't say anything. Now, I'm not inviting the brothers to start walking past the sisters and say, Assalamu alaikum. I'm not inviting for the brothers to do that or vice versa, because of course there are etiquettes concerning that. But a brother walks past a brother, smile, Assalamu alaikum. Immediately their heart is opened, remembering that you're in a blessed place if you're in Mecca or Medina. Are you not to walk past people harshly? Remember, if you want love within the community, spread salam. And this is the way of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And may Allah allow us to be from those people who implement these beautiful sunnah. Brothers and sisters, we've come to the end of this beautiful episode where we completed the advice of Luqman the wise and that what he gave to his son. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He allows us to implement these beautiful advices and that we can be great nurturers and teachers to our children. Allahumma ameen. Until our next episode, barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Oh